Senator Dookie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I am delighted to join this debate and share my thoughts on the matters which are before us, though be it very late in the proceedings. There are some advantages and disadvantages in coming in this late in the proceedings. One of the advantages is that I would have had the pleasure of listening to my colleagues articulate the progress of the government and hearing the balanced presentation from members of the independent bench. But one of the drawbacks is the pain of listening to the opposition in what I can describe as one of the weakest response to a budget I've ever heard in all my life, and I'm no young boy. Both in this house and in the other place. You see, I had the pleasure of listening to Senator Dr. Lester Henry, who, in my opinion, gave an outstanding presentation as he addressed the matters of liquidity and the impact liquidity has on interest rates and the impact interest rates have on borrowing, as he defended government's position and work regarding its borrowing policy, and also articulate the many variables which impact the exchange rate. And again, he explained government's position in the manner in which the government is dealing with the exchange rate. And the opposition had absolutely nothing to say about that. I also had the pleasure of listening to the very distinguished Minister of Works and Transport, Senator Rowan Sinanan, who highlighted project after project after project. Value for money, value for money. No corruption could be levied against any of the projects. Success in the Ministry of Work, and no response from the opposition. In fact, they choose to talk about elections. Well, the opposition, you got one election already. Take your licks one at a time. And I also had the pleasure of listening to the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, who, in my opinion, was extremely kind to Senator Obika, because he took about half of his presentation to teach him about the budgeting process. After he did that, he went on to talk about government's policy and action regarding land tenure for farmers, and of course, Senator Avina Singh also would have provided some information regarding the matter, and of course, the opposition had nothing to say about that. And it was like the Minister of Public Utilities was not satisfied with the schooling given to Senator Obika. He too joined in. Senator Obika is a very special senator, and provided some schooling for him in economics, as he also provided some information on the repo rate, the impact the repo rate has on lending rates. He explained why the government is not taking the advice of the UNC and devaluing the dollar. And after he did that, he went on to provide some information regarding energy efficiency and the initiatives in this regard from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the UNC had nothing to say about that. I heard the Minister of Trade talk about the progress we are making in terms of our balance of trade and trade agreements. No response from the opposition. I heard the Minister of Labor talk about the improvements in the OJT program, not just the increase in stipend, but the improvements in the program. No word from the opposition. I heard the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government talk about local government reform. He's cleaning up the place, highlighting efficiency and productivity in local government, but no word from the opposition. I heard Senator Moses highlighted the improvement in our diplomatic relations, both in CARICOM and in the international arena. No word from the opposition. I heard Senator Cummings talk about the programs in the social sector, housing, community centers being built throughout Trinidad and Tobago, the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, but no word from the opposition. I can conclude, Mr. Vice President, that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is building a new society. You see, we are not like the UNC. They flip-flop. 1 minute, because the election has been called, they talk about reducing taxes. But right in this house, not too long ago, the UNC told the country that we should increase value-added tax to 17.5%, and we should increase corporation tax to 35%. But the election has been called, flip-flop. Now they're saying, put them back in office, and they will reduce taxes. Which one would you believe? And of course, I heard their plans, balance the budget. That is what they are going to do. But I must remind them, they ran this country with record levels of revenue, and they did not balance the budget. How they will do it now? So, Madam President, Mr. Vice President, sorry, the PNM is working, the UNC is talking. I said that indeed we are building a new society, one that is more productive, one with a culture of efficiency and effectiveness, one that is promoting behavioral change in a positive way. And I believe, Mr. Vice President, that there's evidence to this. There's evidence to show that we are progressing with success as we build a new society. I can point to the significant reduction in expenditure, a major success of the government, and I believe this success has been under-celebrated, Mr. Vice President. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, in my view, should be commended for bringing expenditure down as we try to keep expenditure more in line with our revenue reality. The evidence of this new society, we are seeing a movement from negative growth to positive growth. We are seeing stability in our exchange rate. And of course, Senator Henry also reminded us about the experience in Jamaica and Guyana and why we are not going down that road. We are seeing growth in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We are also seeing, as evidence of this new society, surpluses in our balance of payment. And we are also seeing, Mr. Vice President, one of the lowest inflation rates we have ever had as a country. But what I think is necessary to point out, if I go back to 2015, the government of Trinidad and Tobago called upon its citizens to assist and shoulder the burden of adjustments. And indeed, the people of Trinidad and Tobago took heed to that call, worked and contributed. And now that improvements are being seen and improvements are being delivered, the government in this presentation and also previous presentation are saying that the people of Trinidad and Tobago have contributed and they are deserving of benefiting in the growth and development that are taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why, Mr. Vice President, I was so happy when I heard the Minister of Finance giving to CPEP and URP workers an increase of 15%. And I heard on the other side, well, the PNM did it in 2008, and we are repeating it. Well, Mr. Vice President, if it was good once, it certainly would be better another time. The people of Trinidad and Tobago, especially those who are most vulnerable, are desirous of benefiting from the improvements that are taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is my view, Mr. Vice President, that the increase in the minimum wage, which was scoffed at by the opposition, is something that will add value to the lives of those who live at the lowest level in our economic ladder. I can also point out in terms of sharing in the success of the work of all our people. We move into the realm of indexation of pensions. And also the government of Trinidad and Tobago is addressing pensions regarding daily paid workers. I could point out to Mr. Vice President that our social safety net is currently serving approximately 200,000 of deserving citizens. And of course, the increase in stipend for the OJTs, as I referred to, and the increase regarding the intake of 8,000 to 2,000, is showing that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is saying to the people, you contributed, you supported your country, now we can share in the rewards together. I said, Mr. Vice President, that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is building a new society. And one of the approaches in doing so is the government is building new institutions and strengthening existing institutions. As we were taught by Michael Porter, that even if you have favorable macroeconomic conditions, but you have weak and failing institutions, the competitiveness of your firms could be eroded. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago is paying attention to our institutions. One of the institutions that the government is working towards and is making progress is to bring into being of the Revenue Authority. We know, Mr. Vice President, that there are significant weaknesses in our tax administration system and processes. We know in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a high level of leakage. We also know that there's a large informal economy. There's low confidence in our current system. There's a high level of tax avoidance, which means that the tax gap is significantly large. Some estimate it to be in the tune of $5 billion. And we believe the Revenue Authority will improve the structure of tax administration, improve service delivery, bring about a more up-to-date system and procedures. Put together, we believe, when operationalized, it will result in greater confidence by stakeholders, voluntary participation. It will assist in incorporating the informal economy into the formal economy. It will reduce tax avoidance. It will improve fairness and equity. It will be more independent. It will reduce the tax gap. It means more revenue, and that in turn means less need for debt financing. I think the government of Trinidad and Tobago should be commended for pursuing this initiative. And I learned from Senator Rambarat. He said, oh, you could talk in a budget debate as an economist and do talk about revenue and expenditure. Well, I'm talking about revenue. In addition to the Revenue Authority, as we know, significant work is being pursued with regards to the Gambling, Gaming, and Betting Bill 2016 to bring it alive. We know, Mr. Vice President, we do have basically an unregulated gaming sector, and where there are regulations, there is non-enforcement of the existing legal framework, and we believe there is a need to improve compliance, and hence the Gambling, Gaming, and Betting Bill 2016 would assist in addressing this. We know it is before AJSC. We are hopeful of its passage, but what we know, once it comes to life, we can maximize the revenue from the gaming sector, something that has been escaping us. The government of Trinidad and Tobago addressing the issue of revenue administration. And in addition to that, we have heard so much about the property tax. And of course, as the government addresses the issue of revenue, it is also doing what it has to do to bring into being the operationalization of property tax. We know what has happened in the past, and I think we know what has to be done. But I would like to point out, Mr. Vice President, that a property tax operates on a benefit principle, and it accounts for a very high percentage of local government revenue, and we believe it will work hand in hand with local government reform. We believe that the benefits of property tax far outweigh the cash outlay by taxpayers. It has been said by the experts it's one of the most equitable and fairest tax around. And it has also been proven that the use of property tax has contributed to the increase in value of taxpayers' property. The government of Trinidad and Tobago addressing the issue of maximizing revenue to service the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But that's on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, as we strengthen our institutions, we know that the government is moving towards putting into place a new procurement regime. We know that we have already a procurement regulator in office. We believe that when operationalized, it will result in the reduction and or elimination of wastage, corruption, mismanagement. We believe that this institution, functioning the way it ought to, will improve accountability, value for money. It will result in the reduction of unnecessary expenditure. And that, we think, Mr. Vice President, would lead to improvement in the trust by citizens and other stakeholders. And very importantly, it will result in the reduction or removal of the opportunity for corrupt politicians to interfere in the procurement process. A very important element of this regime, which will contribute to ensuring that there is value for money, is the review component. And the legislation provides for certain skills and competencies that are necessary. I just wish to point out that if you examine the role, or the work rather, of David Rosenblum, who highlighted the various responsibilities of this type of institution, he highlighted functions and skills such as strategic planning and scheduling, contract formulation and evaluation, measuring profit leverage effect, grievance procedure, measuring the procurement to return on asset ratio. And that is why the legislation provides for a retired judge, a retired engineer, and a chartered accountant. Let me also point out that studies have shown that in the developed world, procurement constitutes on average 50% of GDP. And in Europe, it has been shown that public procurement systems led to a 10% saving on public expenditure. And one could imagine that if we can achieve this result of a 10% saving on public expenditure, how beneficial it can be for Trinidad and Tobago. So we believe, Mr. Vice President, on the expenditure side, the operationalization of the procurement regime as presented by the government will have the outcome of independence, the elimination of corruption, mismanagement, and will result in value for money. So on the revenue side, we have the Revenue Authority, the operationalization of property tax, and the coming into being and operationalization of the Gambling, Gaming, and Betting Bill 2016 with the various provisions. But one institution I wish to close with and highlight where there has been improvement is what I would describe as the institution of public health. Some presenters would have referred to the Global Competitive Report and highlighted where we are doing well and where we are not doing so well. But one area that is clear that we are showing progress is the issue of health. And if I just look at the 2018 to 2019 period, we would see that our ranking would have improved from 90 to 78. And more importantly, in my respectful view, that our score would have improved from 73 to 78. It tells me that something good is happening in our health sector. But I just want to focus for a couple minutes on what I can describe as the hard elements in our health architecture. A lot has been said about the Point Fortin Hospital. Who started it? Who is going to finish it? Let me remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago that this PNM administration, when it came into office in 2015, met a very messy situation regarding the Point Fortin Hospital. The government would have saved approximately $300 million without adjusting capacity by renegotiating management fees. There was no funding facility in place. Large sums of monies were outstanding to the contractor. The government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago was exposed to hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago, recognizing the situation, used diplomatic intervention, using the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Planning, ensure that proper financing arrangement is in place. And what we can say with confidence is that the People's National Movement government will deliver the Point Fortin Hospital to the people of Point Fortin. And the same can be said for the Arima Hospital. Extremely messy. But the government negotiated a loan in October 2018. Additionally, in excess of $200 million was saved by the government's intervention, again, by renegotiating management fees without adjusting the capacity. And we can say with confidence as well that the Arima Hospital will be delivered to the people of Arima. And I'm reminded to say by the People's National Movement. Of course, we know the situation with the Central Block and the challenges regarding safety and the government's intervention on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that a new facility is constructed, a 540-bed capacity facility, and we believe when that is done, it will improve clinical services to the people of Port of Spain and environment. Another project that we know will be completed by the People's National Movement government. So much also has been said about the Couva Medical and Multi-Training Facility. Well, what is fact, Mr. Vice President, is that the government inherited a construction site which required significant seismic retrofitting. We know that this facility will facilitate training for both locals and foreign professionals and hence usher into Trinidad and Tobago the realm of health tourism. The Sandy Grande Hospital, we know, will soon be a reality. Similar in design to the Point Fortin Hospital, more cost-effective because of economies of scale. And again, this is another project that will be delivered to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, in particular, the people of Sandy Grande. So the hardcore elements in our health infrastructure, the Point Fortin Hospital will be delivered by the PNM government. The Arima Hospital will be delivered and completed by the PNM government. The Central Block in Port of Spain will be delivered by a PNM government. The Sandy Grande Hospital will be completed by a PNM government. The PNM is a government of completion. The PNM is a government of completion. The good works that we have started as a government, we are faithful enough to ensure that they are completed. I encourage Trinidad and Tobago, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to support this budget, support the work of the government, and do so by ensuring that on December 2nd, you come out in your large numbers and you vote resoundingly for a government of performance. You vote for a PNM government. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Chote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to make a few small points with respect to the budget documents with which we have been presented. I think the big picture has already been talked about enough. So my contribution may result in more question asking or observations than anything else. But certainly there are some things that I would respectfully like to have clarified. I start by referring to the Commissioner of Police. Now, that commissioner is not someone who we would call shy. But what I have observed over the last year is that the commissioner on 2 occasions went public with the fact that he was not given enough money to run his office. And that's a pretty serious thing because crime concerns all of us. Now, I don't imagine that the commissioner would the first option of the commissioner would have been to go public on a matter like this. I think the fact that he had to go public on 2 occasions is something which ought to concern us. On one occasion, I recall the Honorable Minister of Finance indicating, at least so it was reported in the press, that he would meet personally with the commissioner. And I wondered, well, why should that have to happen? Because when monies are allocated in the budget, they are supposed to be distributed to the people to whom they are allocated. And inferentially, I understood that what was happening is that monies had been allocated, but monies were not being paid out. I've heard 2 ministers in this chamber over the last year, Minister of Rural Development and Local Government and the Minister of Works, refer to the fact or basically implore that their contractors be paid. Now, then I got to wondering, well, why are we here? Because we have no control over how these monies are to be paid out, when they are to be paid out, and to whom. You go to the Hall of Justice and you look at the list on any door where civil cases are heard, and you will see that there are people suing state enterprises in large numbers, in fairly large numbers, because it means that these state enterprises had not paid people who had done work for them. So this is the problem that I have. And when I look at the disparity between what was allocated in the last budget and what appears to have been given out, in some instances, it's absolutely enormous. So when I looked at the 2019 estimate for the judiciary, for example, 40 million plus. And then I see a revised estimate of 18,455,000. I don't know if I'm getting my figures wrong, or because I am not somebody who is an accountant or somebody with a numbers head, but it seems to me that the judiciary was supposed to have got 40 plus million, and what they actually got was 18 point something million. Now, that would explain to me what I have been seeing as a practitioner in the courts over the last year. It would explain to me why some of the courts can't photocopy. It would explain to me why personnel. You can't find people to even assist the magistrates when they sit in the courts. It would explain to me why some departments are unable to serve you on certain days. So I think that we have to be upfront and clear this up. And if it is that the judiciary, which is a hugely important institution in our lives for the maintenance of the rule of law and also for crime fighting, if the judiciary is being treated in this way, then I believe the country is owed an explanation. Now, happily, the estimate for 2020 I see is 52,600,000. But I say it with some trepidation because I wonder how much of that the judiciary is actually going to get. And I don't want to guess. So that was one of my concerns. Now, the other thing that I looked for when I looked at these budget documents was, I thought to myself, this is going to be a budget that's going to speak environment, because not only new voters, but everybody is concerned about climate change and the impact on the environment and so on. So I was quite happy to see in one of the documents placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. That was the rubric for one of the headings. So I went into the figures now to see, well, how was this going to be managed? I thought I would see something along the lines of the creation of at least a Department of Environment, something which would oversee all the environmental impact agencies. But I didn't. I said, okay, no problem. So let's look at the major problems which face us, or which we know we have to deal with. So I saw that the landfill at Forest Park had been allocated $9,671,000 for the establishment of an engineered sanitary municipal landfill. And less than 1/3 of that money was given out or paid out. Now, that Forest Park area creates a number of difficulties. Number of health difficulties, environmental difficulties, and that landfill has obtained less than 1/3 of what it was allocated. So are we really placing the environment at the center of our social and economic development? I looked at drainage and irrigation. I saw that there was an infrastructure plan for the rehabilitation of flood mitigation, or there was a program for the rehabilitation of flood mitigation. It was supposed to have got $8 million. Apparently, it got $486,000. And as we go along, we see more and more examples of that. I see various ministries have highlighted that there are environmental issues which they take into account. The Ministry of Public Utilities, for example, talks about environmental protection and rehabilitation. Ministry of Energy talks about the acquisition of a synthetic aperture radar for the detection of oil spills. So I paused. That sounds great. It means that we are preparing ourselves for this kind of environmental disaster, which would be extremely expensive for us if it were to happen. I saw that last year it had been allocated, $1 million had been allocated for it. $1,600 had been spent on it. I see that $2 million has been allocated this year, so it means that it is yet to be purchased. but I don't know why it was not purchased when we had allocated money for it in the last budget. So these are some of the questions that I have, and it may be that there are entirely reasonable explanations for them, but certainly as someone reading these documents, these are some of the questions which occur to me. Now, I actually felt quite sorry for Tobago when I saw the number of projects which were being reactivated in this fiscal year. And I counted it up because it means that all of these projects had been stopped or had been put on hold for the last year. And when we consider that a large proportion of people who live in Tobago are employed by the THA, one can only imagine the impact of having these projects stopped had on their lives. So we see now that the THA is going to reactivate 29 projects. 29 projects had been stopped in Tobago and are going to be reactivated in this year. And I didn't count the new projects because there weren't that many. So I just thought that that was unfair to the people of Tobago because I didn't see that kind of distribution of projects being stopped and being started back in Trinidad and Tobago. The only ministry which really spoke about projects with projects which was starting back was the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. So when I counted that, I saw that that ministry is going to start 14 new projects, so presumably in different places in Trinidad. And they were starting back 15 projects which had been stopped. So it seems to me that when we talk about, or when people spoke over the course of the last year about the decline in Tobago and so on, now I understand why. Because the people of Tobago are largely dependent, or were largely dependent, on tourism and work from the THA. And if you take away the work from the THA, then you hurt the island tremendously. And that, I think, is what these figures show. So I'm just happy that these projects are started back, and hopefully we will see the continuation of them. Now, to get back to the courts, because I think maintenance of a high-quality court system is something which we, as the public, must insist upon. I see that the San Fernando Magistrates Court, which had been allocated $3 million, got $234,600. For those who wonder, the San Fernando Magistrates Court is still sharing space with the High Court. So inadvertently, if you think you are going to a courtroom where you'll find a judge sitting, you will find a magistrate hearing court. And that is absolutely unacceptable. It has gone on too long. The judiciary ought to have been given the money to fit out, even if the building could not have been finished in time, the judiciary ought to have been given the money to have adequate accommodation for judicial officers and for the court system. I think this kind of situation where it seems as though the judiciary must come cap in hand asking for money is wrong. It is completely wrong. In addition to that, the Honorable Attorney General has stood here and told us about all of these rollout programs for the improvement of the systems, the working of the judiciary. We look forward to that. It is no fun for lawyers to have to go to court day after day after day and not have their cases go on. we have a vested interest in expedition. So I would have expected to see that all of these programs, which are supposed to be rolling out in the next year, I would have expected to have seen money to fund these programs. But I don't see it. Maybe I am looking in the wrong place, and that is entirely possible. Now, prisons, because that falls under public order and safety. $3,400,000 had been allocated for improvement works to prison buildings. Now remember, this is a figure. I could understand that. You have to work with what you have, even though we know the Port of Spain prison should be shut down. You have to work with what we have. We didn't have the money. But for goodness sakes, if you have allocated $3,400,000 for the improvement of these facilities in hard times, let the prisons have its money. Instead, they got $1,715,000. So it's hardly surprising to learn that the escapees were able to get out of the Golden Grove remand yard prison by cutting a fence. It's hardly surprising that YTC inmates were able to escape. I don't even know if there is a fence. So we cannot claim as a parliament that we are giving attention or paying attention to the needs of these parts of the community if we do not make ourselves accountable by asking these questions and demanding answers.
Minister said 53 million for prison upgrades.
Sorry?
Minister said 53 million for prison upgrades earlier this year.
Yes. Acquisition of CCTV for the prison service, because every week almost in the newspapers you read about people trafficking stuff in the prison, including today. 8 million had been allocated. The prison service got 674,000. That is not a pretty picture. Now, I know legacy projects and, big projects like fixing highways or building roads and so on are important. And any government would want to have those symbols to show that they have worked and that they have worked hard. But to me, the price we're paying when we ignore things like these is becoming too high. Now, the other thing that concerned me when I looked at the figures with respect to Ministry of National Security, I saw that $1 million, which in the scheme of things for a budget is not a particularly large sum, had been allocated for the rehabilitation of young offenders. And we have passed so much legislation over the last year talking about rehabilitation of offenders, restorative justice, and all of those kinds of things, in introducing legislation for the protection of children. You know how much that program got? $40,400. Forensic Science Center, computerization. I see that it was allocated $500,000. There is a dash next to it, so I don't know if they got any. $10,700,000 had been allocated for electronic monitoring. $1,583,000 was paid out. $1 million had been allocated for the computerization of the fire service. There's a dash next to that, so I don't know if any was paid out. And we continue like that. And I say that that aspect of the disparity between allocation and payment is something which ought to concern us. How do we ensure that what is allocated by Parliament, and we don't, this is a money bill, so this is, the government has brought these documents to us. And the government has said, this is what we think we can allocate to these programs and so on. And if it is, for some reason, the government was not able to allocate these amounts, then I think in our budget documents somewhere, when we get them, we should have some sort of brief explanation to say, well, they only ask for this or they requisition this amount and this is why the full drawdown was not given. That would make us feel a little more comfortable as parliamentarians. Now, Criminal Law Department, that covers the DPP's office. And despite the fact that we had a prosecutor killed, and despite the fact that prosecutors every day face security issues, some have to walk with police officers surrounding them, there is nothing set out here for the funding of the security of prosecutors at the office of the DPP. Yes, anti-crime is a big deal. Anti-gang legislation is a big deal. Gangs are a big problem. But what about the people who have to prosecute these cases? Why can't we as a country have security provided for our prosecutors? Now, I also looked at this in the context of how do we treat our vulnerable? So I looked at the Division of Aging, and I looked at the Disability Affairs Unit in the respective ministries. Not even in terms of human resources are we up to standard. Division of Aging, I believe, is a director and a clerk. Disability Affairs Unit is a director and a research officer. Why are we only paying lip service to matters which are important to the body politic? I looked at St. Michael's Home, St. Jude's School for Girls, and the St. Mary's Home. Well, I suppose because St. Jude's School for Girls is called a school, they're lucky enough to be one of the three to actually have an assistant teacher, because there is no teacher assigned to the other two places. In the human resource pool allocated and paid for, you don't have teachers in those institutions. And these are the vulnerable. And these are the people who we want to talk about rehabilitating and restorative justice for, and making sure that they don't get caught up with gangs and they don't become criminals when they enter prison. These are the very same people we might be talking about. Now, someone, I think Senator Thompson IE had raised the issue about legal aid. And I'm not going to repeat what she said, but I think that what we forget when legal aid is funded, because you have a right to legal representation under our Constitution, you have a right. when legal aid is underfunded, the attorneys who may have been minded to stay on the panel to do matters have decided to come off it. Because you can't do 5 cases for the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority and be waiting a year and a half to get paid for those cases. And many young attorneys, bright attorneys, attorneys with the experience to do good work before the courts, have simply come off the list of legal aid. So what happens then? You have cases which can't go on because people are unrepresented. That slows down the system. You have people being represented by young attorneys who ought not to be doing serious matters such as murders and so on when they are under 5 years of call. And that also slows down the system because then the judge is not only hearing a case, the judge is teaching the attorney at the bar. So these things have follow-on effects. And I think too often we look at all of these things in little pockets. Okay, legal aid is that, judiciary is that, and so on. And we don't appreciate that all of these things must function well for the judicial system to work well and for us to have the kind of public safety that we wish to have in this country. When you look at what is provided personnel at the prison, 1 psychologist is assigned for all 3 prisons. I know that there's a psychiatrist who comes once every 3 weeks, and presumably he comes with trainee psychiatrists. So that is the kind of personnel that we have to treat with people who need mental health treatment. I think there was a study, it may have been the Inspector of Prison study, which pointed out that there was an estimate that about a quarter of the persons held in our prisons have mental health issues. Should we not be trying to deal with that issue or those issues before they return to society? I think it's the Inspector of Prisons report, yes. So, we talk so much about making this country a safer place and giving this to the judiciary and having court pay and so on, and all of that is working well, but we are really not addressing the problems of the judiciary, the prisons, and the prosecutors. I'll give you a funny example, Mr. Vice President. One of the attorneys in my office went to Rio Claro to deal with a matter earlier this week. So the court pay machine was up, very nice, but you know what? Court couldn't be heard because the person who had the key for the filing cabinet hadn't come to work for 3 days. Apparently, we can't afford to cut keys in the judiciary. So I think that we have to appreciate that we are all for wonderful new systems, computerization of this, that, and the other. But we also have to ensure that we invest in the human resources to make sure that the systems work. Until robots replace us, we are going to be appearing before the courts as lawyers and doing cases. The Sentencing Commission, appointed, I think, about 18 months now. Sentencing Commission has a significant role to play. Any judicial officer will tell you one of the most difficult things to do is sentence a person. And sentencing has taken on a life of its own because of new procedures such as the maximum sentence indication process and this kind of thing. The Sentencing Commission ought to be able to do research which can assist the Judicial Educational Institute and the Law Association, so that what we present before the courts is informed and the practitioners are informed. I don't think they have yet received a home. They did their best and produced a report, but they are still in abeyance after 18 months. That is not acceptable, with all due respect. And just to round up, now I don't mean to say these things as sounding critical of the budget, but I just think that if it is that you are saying this is the budget and this is what the community is being offered, and in fact, that those are not the figures that we should be looking for in reality, we ought to be told so. Now, one of the CARIFESTA, I agree, was one of the big successes that we had this year. And I saw that there is an intention to create a music export academy. Well, honorable members of this House, we have something called a National Symphony Orchestra. They are paid, each member, and many of them are leaders of their respective steel orchestras or deputy leaders. They are paid, and these are people with master's degrees in some cases, they're paid about the same amount as a police constable. And we want to have a music export academy. What is going to encourage them to stay? They cannot even charge when they perform because they fall apparently under the head of a national organization. So they don't travel. They can't liaise with other musicians around the world. They can't develop their skills. They can't go and teach in other places and teach people about our musical instrument and our musical heritage. These are some easy things to fix. So I can't understand why more attention is not given to streamlining some of the services or institutions which are run by the government. Because some of them require very little effort for improvement. But it seems as though some people are stuck in a situation where they think that we have to say no to everything. We have to put everything down or think that we are not good enough. Well, I think there are some institutions which I've mentioned here which certainly deserve encouragement and funding. And if you tell the people you're going to get $1 million, please let them have the $1 million, because you could imagine how devastating it is for an institution or a group doing this kind of work to be promised this money and to be making plans and thinking, okay, well, this is how we're going to move forward this year, only to realize that you're sending requisition and you're writing letters to the PS and nothing is coming out of it. I think our population deserves better than that. So, Honorable Vice President, these are some of my thoughts on the figures which I've seen in the budget documents. As I say, much of, or even all of what I said might be the subject of reasonable explanations. But certainly, it would be nice to have explanations. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
Senator Ameen.
Mr. Vice President, as we are on this third day of discussion and debate in the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, I thank you for this opportunity to contribute to what is popularly called Budget 2020, or, in other words, the final budget of this PNM government. Mr. Vice President, a budget is a promise. And for the past 4 years, the government, led by the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, has made numerous promises to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that they have failed to keep. God knows, if promises alone could run a country, Trinidad and Tobago would be booming under the PNM. For 4 years, the PNM has made budget promise after budget promise, many of which never materialized. And they returned the following year with not even a mention of some of these previous promises, and then come to promise the nation more. And so Budget 2020 is sadly no different from the other budgets of the term of this government. Heavy on promises, very low on actions and achievements. Mr. Vice President, over the past 4 years, we have seen the government standing in a bucket, attempting to lift itself up by the handles by raising existing taxes and introducing new taxes. And this is because of their failure to find innovative means of generating revenue in this country. A keen observation, Mr. Vice President. The budget, before the budget was read, there was some excitement because the country felt that this is an election budget. This is the government's last hurrah. You would get, you'll get some oomph. You would get something to talk about. There's no excitement. There's very little interest from the national community. People are laughing at them. People who don't have food are being promised bulbs.
Yes.
That is governance PNM style.
Shame.
The national budget of this 2019-2020 has not stimulated discussion within this nation. It really has fallen flat. This budget debate, however, has turned into a debate in the Parliament, both in the lower house and in the Senate, on what is being deemed as the alternative budget, the National Economic Transformation Master Plan, presented by the incoming Prime Minister, Member of Parliament for Siparia, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar. And you know why, Mr. Vice President? That is because that is the only plan that was presented that was worthy of any mature discussion in our democratic society. In the House of Representatives, the place where people are elected to speak on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, one opposition MP expounded on some intricate relationships with the transactions with Petrotrin, and the whole government get quiet.
Pip, they get pip.
The Prime Minister used a term called PIP, and it seemed as though all his members got PIP.
Pip contagious.
They ran from the lower house. And Mr. Vice President, I have been participating, I've had the honor to sit in this chamber since 2015 to participate in budget debate. This is the most lackluster, uninspired debate I have seen from the government members in the Senate on a budget. Most lackluster. Because the budget is just, sprinkled with repeated promises, and there are some outright untruths, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President. There are certain members on the other side who really work on their presentation. But unfortunately, the thing is, if your entire government is not performing and you try to show up the good work you might be attempting to do, it really will be, a drop in a barrel. and it really just disappears. The Minister of Labour reiterated a number of issues that she has been talking about for a long time, but unfortunately have not borne fruit. And my colleague, Senator Anita Haynes, spoke well about the promises that were made concerning OJT and so on, and the lack of vision for the development focus on training and so on. The same trade, well, my partner from Foreign Affairs, he's not here, but the ministers of government, Mr. Vice President, they really seem to be living in an alternative reality. We have witnessed a number of them telling us the sky is purple. They are trying to sell us dreams. They are trying to convince us that their truth is the truth, and when it is a totally different from what the reality on the ground is. So telling us that you are doing well and telling us Trinidad and Tobago life is good, telling us that the economy is turning around, telling us that things are booming, does not make it a reality. In fact, Mr. Vice President, it is unparliamentary to mislead the House. We have witnessed a government fire sale on our patrimony for a one-time raise as a significant revenue generator, and the government who put the assets on sale in the first place, the assets of the state, purchased the state-owned bonds largely through state-owned companies and then declared the sale a resounding success. Himself unto himself, declaring success. We have witnessed the firing of thousands of workers in this country. And yet, members of the government tell us that unemployment is on a decline. Mr. Vice President, the thousands of workers fired under the PNM include 500 workers from TSTT, 150 from CDA, the steel workers of ArcelorMittal, over 5,000 Petrotrin workers fired, 500 ECC teachers, 150 traffic wardens, 200 litter wardens, 1,700 CPEP workers from South, 150 trucking contractors with and their employees also make a significant amount. There were 200 from a company under the ministry which maintains boats. There were 199 workers and 59 lecturers from UTT, and the list goes on. And yet, they are telling us that unemployment is on the decline. They are living in a total alternative reality. Alice in Wonderland.
Tell us what it is. Give us the figure.
So, Mr. Vice President, no minister should be coming here to ask the opposition to give them figures on employment and unemployment. They are supposed to come to the nation on what the reality is. I am telling you, Mr. Vice President, based on what I am aware of that is reported in the media, but the truth, the data should be coming from the minister's office, and the minister has failed to provide that. Because they are trying to tell us that employment is on the increase, that unemployment is low. So as they continue to tell tales of prosperity, tales of turnaround and good governance, more of our citizens, Mr. Vice President, are on the breadline today because of their failure and their incompetence. They talk about prosperity. Mr. Vice President, the prosperity for the PNM has been for friends, family, and financiers of the PNM. It is well documented and well reported in the media of a number of wives of ministers who were awarded government contracts, senior government members who collected millions in property rental, and publicly proclaimed friends of the Prime Minister, named in allegations, defrauding the state of millions of dollars. That is the prosperity. And they want to tell us that there is no more corruption under the PNM. Totally laughable, totally false. I have news for you. Nobody in Trinidad and Tobago believes you when you say that. The PNM invented corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. From O'Halloran to One Alexander to fake oil. The prosperity of the friends and family and financiers. Mr. Vice President, it doesn't trickle down to the small businesses in this country that are holding on by razor-thin margins. Or in some cases, they are being forced to close operations due to the economic downturn. And it is made worse by this government's inability to manage the nation properly. The illusory prosperity does not trickle down to the vulnerable in society. This fictitious prosperity does not trickle down to the children of our nation whose futures are being compromised every day because this government plays Russian roulette with the education sector. It does not trickle down to the mothers who cradle our nation's future, who are forced to steal milk for their babies. This government, Mr. Vice President, has promised sustainable jobs, quality health care, improvement to education, hope for youth, and all we have seen is talk, 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 no action. PNM promises never materialized. It is their 4th year in office, and it is very clear that the PNM talks. But this nation knows that the UNC works. Mr. Vice President, I did an analysis. The opposition did an analysis of the 4 budgets in this government, presented by this government, including Budget 2020. And it reveals that there were over 600 promises made in the 4-year period. And you know, Mr. Vice President, an astounding 65% of those promises were either repeated or failed. But according to the PNM, life is good. I want to very quickly go into a few examples. Mr. Vice President, the promises range in all the areas of governance: energy, social development, agriculture, labor, trade, fiscal measures, and an area of my passion, local government. But I want to spend some of my limited time on an area that I believe really is a core part of national development: education, health, sport, and young people. Mr. Vice President, in education, in 2015-2016 budget, the government promised the curriculum of our schools will be modernized with a view to generating among our young people an adequate appreciation and understanding of the history of Trinidad and Tobago, especially our history since independence, 1962. Well, they do not concern in that yet. That is another failed promise. They promised to develop a culture of personal responsibility and volunteerism. Well, Mr. Vice President, at first I considered this a failed objective. But then I realized that by September 2019, book lists with supplies requested by students, by teachers, were being circulated. And this is how they achieved this objective. So by suppressing or by depriving the schools of their resources, teachers, parents, and children now have to work with their own toilet paper. They have to purchase cleaning supplies, paper. Where security contracts were stopped in schools, the parents have to put up money to pay for security. We also had the contracts of office staff coming to an end and the ministry not renewing them. And because of the need, again, the parents and the teachers had to pool money to continue to keep the staff members on. And it goes on and on. Even furniture, a lot of fundraising and so on taking place to buy furniture and so on in the schools. So they have achieved that objective to create volunteerism by force. What they boast and call free education, children are being forced, parents are being forced to pay from it because they cannot buy simple things like toilet paper for schools. 2016 again, they said that their investments in the education sector had increased the number of university graduates in Trinidad and Tobago exponentially, and that they would continue to build on this legacy and ensure the future investments in education upholds quality, efficiency, effectiveness, and so on. Mr. Vice President, that legacy that they referred to is the legacy of the government led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar that met and passed its own target of 60% tertiary education graduates in Trinidad and Tobago. And they have reversed that upward trend by the policies that they have in government. Curriculum reform, continuing with curriculum reform, Mr. Vice President, I want to move to the ICT education plan, which they promised to roll out in the next fiscal year. This was in 2016, They promised to roll it out in 2017. Where see it yet? They said that they would have the establishment of an overarching ICT in education policy. They failed to do that. In fact, Mr. President, I'll tell you, they really had nothing to do in this area. The People's Partnership had already introduced a comprehensive ICT policy in conjunction with UNESCO. So even if they don't like Kamla, let me rephrase. Even if they have a dislike for the leader of opposition and policies put forward, this was a policy in conjunction with UNESCO and the Organization of American States. And Trinidad and Tobago was appointed the Center for Virtual Education for Latin America and the Caribbean under the leadership of Kamla Persad-Bissessar. So they had no work to do there. They said they were going to train, they were dealing with the training and professional development of teachers and other educators. They have failed to do that. The People's Partnership government had trained thousands of teachers and principals in ICT at varying levels of competency, in addition to the language arts and mathematics, mediation and science and so on. They promised they would have the provision of adequate and appropriate ICT infrastructure in schools. That they have failed. Mr. Vice President, do you know that not one new computer lab has been established in a single primary or secondary school in Trinidad and Tobago under this government? Not a single one. There is no increase in the bandwidth connectivity in secondary or primary schools. They promised the curriculum reform, which was supposed to include ICT-infused lessons plans for students. ICT in education under the PNM, Mr. Vice President, is really a disaster. And sadly, it's a really archaic dinosaur type of thinking to make fun of the distribution of laptops to children in schools. The government made fun and they criticized the laptops that were distributed under the People's Partnership. And it was only recently that I understand they purchased 50 laptops for each secondary school. And this was after years of public pressure and scathing attacks on the former government. So these laptops are to remain in the schools and are not given to the children. There was supposed to be an establishment of an ICT steering committee. That really has not gone nowhere. ICT really is very non-existent. The People's Partnership between 2010 to 2015 had implemented all of the programs and policies mentioned in their budgets, in their promises with regards to ICT in education. Mr. Vice President, the PNM said that they had a new plan to provide for laptops for each form level in each secondary school, and that laptops would be used during class sessions that require the use of ICT-related tasks. But you know what happened? Students writing CSEC and CAPE were told that they would benefit from, hear what? Bring your own device. A BYOD policy for those who would like to use their own device for school-based assessments and research. Mr. Vice President, we know that not all children could afford, not all homes can afford the device. But even for those who can afford, having standardized equipment and technology available would allow for proper monitoring, would allow for security and the technology to be installed in case any of these devices are stolen, and to ensure that there is equity across the board with regards to the technology that the students would access. So it's not only about those who can, in fact, afford, but in terms of what they can afford. Mr. Vice President, they also promised additionally the capital investment policy for our schools would ensure that the aging infrastructure is refurbished and dilapidated buildings are replaced with modern facilities in a timely and cost-effective manner. What that means is that they were going to build up the old schools, the dilapidated facilities, and so on. They promised to work in harmony with denominational boards to realize this objective. They have failed miserably. What are the facts? From 2010 to 2015, Mr. Vice President, there were 106 schools constructed by the Kamla Persad-Bissessar-led government. There were 31 primary schools, 6 secondary, and 69 early childhood education centers. In addition, there were a number of additional blocks and labs, extended repairs and upgrades that were undertaken in several schools. And I thought the Minister of Education may have taken the opportunity to join this House to add to the debate, but I would like him to visit his alma mater, Hillview, and see that the new block that was started under the People's Partnership is still languishing and awaiting his attention. I hope he could give them some good news soon. You know what I find tragic, though, Mr. Vice President? There are in addition to the 106 schools, there are an additional 62 schools that were at various stages of completion when the PNM came into office, that they have left to rot. 19 primary schools, 6 secondary schools, and 37 early childhood schools. It is an extensive list. I can't submit it for the purpose of the Parliament's record. But, Mr. Vice President, education is a cornerstone of national development. And it is either pure incompetence or wickedness that you have neglected these schools and neglected that key aspect of national development. You know what's happening to the schools under construction? Children are being placed in buses and being bussed off to rented buildings in other areas. They are being housed in cramped spaces, in buildings that are insufficiently outfitted, and the hours of school are also interrupted. It certainly, Mr. Vice President, is costing more. The candle is costing more than the funeral. It is costing more in the long run. The price, the government funding to rent the building and just to hire the transport alone could have completed some of these structures. But because, Mr. Vice President, it was started by the previous government, it seems that it is their objective to not complete them. Recently, an issue at the St. Joseph Secondary School arose, and the Minister of Education indicated that the ministry intended to go and clean up the overgrown bushes, to put a fence, to put security, to get the public health to intervene, to get rid of the rats and snakes and so on, and to minimize the security risk of criminals using the vacant property as a hiding space and for illegal activities. I want them to add up the cost of doing all of that in each school that they have abandoned, and then go and face the electorate and admit the wastage that you are committing in the Ministry of Education. Total wastage and total inefficiency. These new costs, Mr. Vice President, will roll over to the new government, which will be led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar. And education is a pillar of national development and certainly will not be treated with the scorn and disregard it is being met with by this present government. Mr. Vice President, there are so many broken promises and so little time. I quickly move to health. 2015, they told us they were going to review the existing hospital strategies and so on, dealing with the construction of hospitals and the refurbishing and so on. The people of Point Fortin and the people of Arima would thank the UNC for starting those hospitals in Point Fortin and Arima. You know, these two constituencies have traditionally had PNM representatives. And these two hospitals were promised by so many PNM governments since before I born. And it took a UNC-led government to bring this to reality. So every time several members on the other side spoke about that as an achievement, and I know that they are grateful that it still started, because it couldn't start under the PNM at all. In fact, there are a number of health facilities named as achievements that were started by the UNC, and I really want to see those reach to completion, because at the end of the day, it is the people of this country, of Trinidad and Tobago, that will benefit. There is not a single new health facility that was started by the PNM government that they have been able to complete, not a single one. So all of your achievements you boast about in hospital construction, thank the People's Partnership. Thank Kamala Prasad Bisesa. The big Couva Children's Hospital, of course, ACDAP Pharmacy. They said they would expedite surgeries and expand and improve the chronic disease assessment program. These are actual budget promises, clauses I'm reading, Mr. Vice President. What they did for the CDAP, they took the state-of-the-art Couva Children's Hospital, with CT scanners and beds and all the equipment, and they turned it into, what they call it, a CDAP pharmacy? A drugstore. They really watered down the quality of it, but I am not worried. This facility is sound and safe, and with the return of the new government, you will see that facility maximized for the sake of Trinidad and Tobago. As the Couva Children's Hospital. You could call it what name you want.
I did no construction.
Mr. Vice President, they promised to expend substantial resources on training opportunities in all areas of healthcare, including support staff in professions of allied medicine, particularly in the field of nursing. So the goal was to establish universal health coverage for the national community. That was a goal of the People's Partnership as well, and that is why we established the El Dorado Nursing and Allied Health Facility. That was well-staffed and well-attended. The attendance there, the enrollment has dropped a bit, and in fact what we are seeing, there's a disincentive for persons who want to study nursing, because up to very recently the nurses were in the media begging for their stipends to be paid to them. The government has been withholding funding from the facility and the stipends to be paid. If you want these students, some of them really have good intention and they genuinely cannot afford. The stipend is not a salary. It is just that, a stipend that would allow them to pay their passage to reach to work, buy lunch and so on. And the stipend that is given to the nurses, if they are deprived of that stipend, it could mean that they may have to drop out of studies. And I want to beg this government, I want to urge this government, do not let those nursing students be compromised, because our nation does need the nurses. Just quickly, with regards to the nursing, Mr. Vice President, I want to introduce a matter that requires the attention of the Minister of Health. The Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Midwives, and the Psychiatric Nurses Association of Trinidad and Tobago has served a pre-action protocol letter upon the Minister of Health because they are seeking judicial review for a decision taken by him to select a gentleman whose name I will not call as one of his appointees to the Nursing Council of of Trinidad and Tobago. So the ministerial appointment, Mr. Vice President, usually comes on recommendation from the Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association. The minister has totally disregarded the representative bodies in making this decision. But what is of significance, and why they are asking the minister to reconsider that appointment, the minister really has the latitude to choose any person. There are over 8,000 people in the field of nursing and midwifery in Trinidad and Tobago, and he can choose any person. But the person he has selected is currently embroiled in a legal matter with the courts, with the other associations, with the other nursing associations. And it is proving to be a problem, and I don't think it will be harmful. The minister could choose anyone else, but the person presently selected who sits on that nursing council of Trinidad and Tobago is presently embroiled in a legal battle, and I want to take this opportunity to call on the minister to make another appointment so that you could have better harmony in working with the associations whom I have named. Mr. Vice President, can you tell me how much time I have?
You finish at 3:42.
Good, thank you. Mr. Vice President, the government also promised to review the Children's Life Fund. They're still reviewing it. Too many children have died, literally died waiting. There are so many empty promises, so many broken promises, Mr. Vice President, as I told you, over 600 promises, and more than 65% of them broken. I wanted to talk so much about health and so on, and I will have to put that aside for now. I must touch on local government. Local government reform has been a horse well beaten from this government. The government has held a number of public meetings. Those were not consultations. I attended those meetings. And they were public meetings. The local government reform package went to a joint select committee, and I'm looking forward to that debate. In the budgets, they have made probably 2 mentions of things that would be impact on local government. The government brought legislation to have a new tax on tires. And they indicated that the revenue from that would go towards establishing a plant or some sort of facility to recycle tires. That is yet to be established. In local government, we have seen a number of provisions, promises being broken. Sorry, we have not seen many promises, but we have seen a number of practices that undermine local government, where regional corporations are being starved for funding, so much so that local government councillors have been evicted from offices throughout Trinidad and Tobago because their rent for their offices could not be paid. And that is a fact.
It's true.
I can provide the information. Yes, some of it also made the news. I can provide the information and copies of eviction notices that I have. So we had it happening in the Mayaro region, in the Sandy Grande region. We had it happening in Cedros. And I can provide you with some eviction notices from other areas where they give notices, but they didn't proceed with the actual eviction.
They weren't lucky enough to get bungalows.
So,
They didn't get bungalows. They didn't get bungalows.
Mr. Vice President, quickly I want to respond. You know, Mr. Vice President, that in 2013, I contested the Chaguanas West by-election, and Senator Avinash Singh also contested, and we both were defeated candidates. And as young people, Mr. Vice President, it was a rich learning experience. So I have a special soft spot for my colleague, Senator Avinash Singh. Well, Avinash got more licks than me. So I will bring you the results.
Senator,
But
Senator,
Mr.
there's really no need to shout at the minister as much as, you know, she's moved into this lively part of her contribution. Can we refrain, Senator, Minister? Yes. Can we refrain from shouting across the floor at the member? Continue, Senator Ameen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I take all that in good stride. That election really was a wonderful learning experience. And during the campaign, on a number of occasions, I had opportunities to sit with now Senator Avinash, who was candidate at that time. He was a PNM candidate. We met in the temple in Felicity and so on. But Mr. Vice President, I want to warn him. Senator Avinash Singh, don't put your head on a block for your colleagues. Don't put your head on a block for your colleagues. What you are trying to refer to as 2 copybook page, the file that my colleague Senator Saddam Hussein read from, allegations of serious abuse of state resources. That file, Mr. Vice President, is worth investigating. And Mr. Vice President, I want to tell Senator Avinash, the note that they passed to him, be careful when that file is investigated. He may have to eat his words. He spoke about the Central Audit Committee, and he read reports from him, which was passed to him from his colleagues. And, you know, he really made my argument for me. Basically, what he was saying is that the former Prime Minister became aware of wrongdoing, became aware of improprieties within this program, and she acted immediately. She acted on the report and took immediate action. But what does the PNM do? They sweep the corruption under the carpet. The Darrell Smith report on sexual harassment, we're still waiting for. The member of parliament, the sitting member of parliament, whose several warnings went out in public about her appointment as a minister. They swept it under the carpet until the police arrested the MP. The A&V drilling, a friend of the Prime Minister, $100 million siphoned off. They sweep it under the carpet. So, Mr. Vice President, the difference with how corruption is responded to by the various governments, I want to tell you, the UNC has an approach where we take immediate action, whether it is to have an investigation and have the wrongdoers brought to justice. But the PNM continues to cover up and sweep things under the carpet and hide for their friends and their financiers. Mr. Vice President.
Thanks for reminding us.
Mr. Vice President, one of the issues as well has to do with the government's priorities and where they spend the money. But very quickly, Mr. Vice President, I want to bring to the attention of this House. There are 3 companies that I want to speak to you about. One is Pical Services Company Limited. 2, Clydon Enterprise Company Limited, and 3, Cummings and Associates Company Limited. Mr. Vice President, I have documents that were filed indicating who the directors of these companies and the shareholders are, and I could provide it for the Parliament for the record. Mr. Vice President, I want to raise some questions. Contract number 1, Besson Street demolition. This project was managed by the UDCOT, and the contract was to demolish the building, and it was awarded to Pical Services Limited. And Mr. Vice President, based on the documents and the registration of the company, there is a sitting government senator who has an interest in Pical. Pical Services was awarded the contract through selective tendering.
So, select?
In other words, he handpicked them. During the demolition, the major beam in the building was knocked down, and this building collapsed. It was very unsafe for persons in the community and for children in particular. So the work was done badly. So the facts are that this contract was awarded by UDCOT, that Pical Services was awarded the contract, and the contract was awarded by sole select by select tendering. In other words, they were handpicked. And the question, of course, is whether a sitting government senator has an interest in PICAL. Again, Mr. Vice President, I'm coming to the point of, I have 5 more minutes, of coming to the point to endorse, pardon?
2 seconds.
Don't be like Heinz. That is not a good example. Heinz
So,
is not a
Mr.
good
Vice
example.
President,
You see what happens
I
then
raise
when
this
you go
matter
outside, eh?
because UDICOT falls under the office of the Prime Minister.
Don't be like-
Contract number
Heinz is
2,
not a good example.
PICAL with regards to HDC government garbage collection services. You didn't tell me 5 minutes.
Yeah, you should have better.
Senator Cummings and Senator Haynes.
Yeah, IRL.
You didn't tell me I had 5 more minutes.
Minister and Senator Hussein. Thank you. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So, Vice President, I joined this debate on the Appropriation Financial Year 2020 Bill 2019. I am the last speaker before the Minister wraps up.
Give them something to lose.
For 2 reasons. One, I'm protecting my voice. I protected a little more than Senator Vera. And secondly, I have had the honor and privilege to hear everybody speak. Plus, I also have the distinguished privilege that after I speak, nobody can rebut me. But I think we have had a reasonably good debate. As normal, the members on the government bench distinguished themselves. But I want to pay tribute to 3 senators as leader of government business. And it's the 3 senators who do not hold executive office. Senator Foster Cummins, Senator Lester Henry, and Senator Daniel Dookie. They were excellent. And I think in the next administration, we have to reconsider that. We had very good and balanced contribution from the independent bench as per normal. And if I must say, the opposition was a big disappointment. They are a beaten team. The match has started yet, and they have their hands up in the air. Even Captain Mark, who normally plays a good inning, if I should say so myself, was so unimpressive.
Fell flat.
He had no good shots to hit. And that gives you the state of the United National Congress at this point in time. Mr. Vice President, let me take this opportunity to congratulate the Minister of Finance, again for an excellent budget, his 5th budget, the members of staff of the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Planning and Development, who I should say is the unsung hero in the budget presentation because she has responsibility for the development program, which is really the true driver of the economy. But when we took office in 2015, I just want to read the theme of the budgets as we progressed. 2016, restoring confidence and rebuilding trust. Let us do this together. You could follow the progression. State of play was bad. 2017, shaping a brighter future, a blueprint for transformation and growth. 2018, changing the paradigm, putting the economy on a sustainable path. 2019, everybody criticized it, turn around. And today we see 2020, stability, strength, and growth. We saw the future. We planned for the future. And today we can say with confidence that we have performed well.
Yeah.
Despite all the economic pundits, I'm stepping out my crease to say this, but it took a geologist prime minister and a civil engineer minister of finance to put this economy back on track. Let me indicate, I don't want to repeat too much what the minister in the Ministry of Finance has stated, but these are the macroeconomic parameters that we have turned around. Improvement in GDP, moving from negative 6.3 in 2016, 2.3 in 2017, before stabilizing in 2018, and achieving a 1.7% growth in the first quarter of 2019. Latest World Bank estimates 0.9% growth for 2019. Growth estimated 2020, 21, and 22, 1.9, 4.1, and 3.6 respectively. Inflation, lowest in the world, 0.9%, under 1%. An increased collection of non-oil revenue. Oil and gas royalties exceeding $2.7 billion. Projected deficit of $3.9 billion for 2019, compared to a budgeted deficit of $5.7 billion, which is a reduction of $1.7 billion. Net public debt, 62.0% of GDP. Gross official reserves, 7.1 billion US for 8 months cover. And the list goes on and on. Mr. Vice President, I want to compliment Senator Rambarat because he hit the nail on the head. It could not have been said more succinctly and more articulately. The budget, and all due respect to Senator Ahi, the budget is not a Word document, it's an Excel document. It is about revenue and it's about expenditure. If your revenue is greater than your expenditure, you have a surplus. This country has not had a surplus for over a decade. Please.
When I said Word document,
I know.
it was contrasting with figures. So it has nothing to do with, oh, so you were being funny then. I see. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
And you are one of my favorite senators because
I thought I was the only one with a sense of humor.
Apart from being a natural science student, my love was literature. I just couldn't see a career out of it. So when you quote all these Keats and Shelley and things, I enjoy it. It's about expenditure and revenue. And then, if revenue is less than expenditure, you have a deficit. And I have said this in this House on numerous occasions. There are only 3 sources of government revenue: taxes, the sale of public assets, which is a one-off function, and borrowing. Money doesn't grow on trees. So if you do not deal with your revenue, as was articulated by the minister in the Ministry of Finance, you're out of this game. And my presentation today will focus largely on energy revenues, because energy is the driver of the economy. And I don't want to preempt myself, but it is not about how much gas we produce, but it's what we earn from the gas. And I will deal with that later on. But, Mr. Vice President, let me do some rebuttal. And not rebuttal, but some comments in some cases. I particularly enjoyed the presentation of Senator Sipasad. She got me a little scared when she was asked by the Vice President, how long is your speech? And she said 38 minutes. You know, she's normally very brief. So I said, wow, hope that doesn't send a signal for later in the year. But having said that, she made some excellent points on renewables. It was well researched, and it was well presented. But I just want to share with her a few facts and to show why continuation of policy is so important in governance. We were going to build an aluminum smelter, a new source of revenue for this country in foreign exchange. The Chinese got the contract. We built the most modern electricity generation plant at Labrie, the TGU plant, with a capacity of 730 megawatts. When the UNC came into office in 2010, they scrapped it. But we were saddled with 770 megawatts of power that we could not use. And to make matters worse, it was way down in Labrie, and there was no substation to transmit that power to the north, which is the big user. So, but when you have independent power producers, there's something called a take-or-pay contract. Because they wouldn't put on a power plant without a contract to sell the power. When we took office in 2015, TNTech was paying TGU $45 million a month for unused power. Thank God we hustled and finished the Gandhi Village substation. So a lot of that power could now come to the north. The bill has been reduced to approximately $25 million per month. What that means is the country has a generating capacity of 1,750 megawatts, but it's only using 1,350 megawatts. There's a 400 megawatt surplus that we have to pay for. So when we will go into renewables, because we committed to Paris, but we'll be paying for that electricity twice. It's a reality we have to face. And that shows when successive administration goes into office, they have to be very careful as when they scuttle projects of the previous administration. This is a classic example. The other thing to note about renewables is that Trinidad is one of 3 countries in the world that produces its entire power supply from gas turbines. Turkmenistan, Qatar, Bahrain, and Trinidad, 4. I always say, what is the sense of an electric car when you're generating the power from coal? So all the countries that brandy they're into renewables, once they're generating electricity from coal, that's where the danger is. But we are committed to Paris. I'm not saying renewables is not the future, but I'm just showing you the current environment. Having said that, gas turbines, power generation. And let me deal with Senator Saddam Hussein. He's a young man. He came in here, and I was impressed with some of his presentation. I listened to him on television this morning because I was in some meetings. In China, or in Japan, they have been reprimanded so badly for being disrespectful to your elders. He called Professor Julian a nuisance. Yes, he did. I heard him on television.
Yes.
Professor Julian was instrumental in taking flared low-pressure gas off the East Coast and started to pipe it onshore to generate power in Trinidad. That led to the formation of the NGC. Look how much billions they took from the NGC. It is Professor Julian's creation. Professor Julian was instrumental in Point Lisas. Professor Julian is the single most important person who convinced Patrick Manning to get into LNG. The most money this country has ever earned in its history is 2007, 2008. And here is this young upstart, sorry to say that, could get up in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and call Professor Julian a nuisance. Should apologize to him.
Shame on you, shame, shame. Shame on you, shame.
Shame on you all for dropping in $35 million case. That is what shame is. Shame, that is shame.
I could stop talking now, you know.
That's right.
I've made my point. You have to understand where we came from and where the wealth of this country was generated. And I take serious offense to that and umbrage. And this is the generation that the UNC is putting on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. He apologized, you know. Apologize. I want a written apology to Professor Julian.
Okay. Leader of Government Business. So I have allowed, even in the contribution, as you're responding to comments that would have gone before, the little back and forth, because again, it's a debate, so that happens. But when we get into that realm of pointing and telling people what to do, we're trying to stay away from that. Members on the left as well, allow the member to contribute and continue. Leader of Government.
So, Mr. Vice President, thank you. And I'm guided.
You're still talking.
We're talking about revenue. As I said earlier, it is not about how much gas we produce or how much oil we produce. It is how much revenue the country gets from it. Because oil and gas are a depleting asset. They are wasting resource. And there's a principle of petroleum taxes that has to be honored. The taxation system for oil and gas, oil in particular, are as follows. You take a royalty from the top. It ranges between 10% and 10.5%, 12.5%. That means 10 to 12.5% of your gross revenue comes off the top to the state. Then there's something called petroleum profits tax, which is a windfall tax. Because you're in an industry where commodity prices bear no relation to cost of production. So if somebody drops a bomb in Saudi Arabia, oil price jumps to $100. You cannot reasonably expect the oil companies to gain all that money. So the state has a right to take back some of that. That's what petroleum profit tax is about. And then there's the normal, what is called PPT, corporation tax. When we had a decrease in revenue, significantly in 2015, 2016, and 2017. One of the key issues that the country needs to understand is that there are two types of licenses that operate in Trinidad. What is called the exploration and production license, which BP has most of it. And then there's a more advanced contract, which was pioneered by Mr. Andrew Jupiter when he was Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy, called the production sharing contract, where the state doesn't take taxes, but they take a percentage of the oil or gas. However, when we moved to gas, gas never had a royalty. And BP was operating only on the exploration and production license. So BP, who produces 55 to 58% of the country's natural gas resources, was not subject to a royalty. And when they are only subject, and there is no PPT on gas either, not PPT, no SPT. So you had a situation which, in my view and in the view of the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister, was untenable. And here you have your largest gas producer, only subject to a profit tax, which you can know how to manipulate that. So when, within 1 month of coming into office, BP comes to the Prime Minister and says, so, based on our capital write-offs, we wouldn't have a tax liability until 2024. Imagine you come into a government with 3 days supply because of your overdraft of running the country, and your biggest gas producer comes to you and says, we will not have a tax liability until 2024. That's where we were. That is why the Prime Minister, happy birthday, sir, 1 day late, had to take the lead, because this was very, very serious matters. We say, no, one school here to finish paint, and with a vine growing on it, whether this contractor wasn't paid. This hit at the heart of the economy. This hit at the jugular. And if that matter wasn't sorted out, this country was going to hell in a handbasket. That is why the Prime Minister took the lead. He reconstituted the Standing Committee on Energy. The first thing we did is that he met with the leaders of the oil and gas companies. That resulted in the first policy decision to impose a 12.5% royalty on gas, effective 1st of January 2018. Mr. Vice President, this country, on the revenue side, earned 2.7 billion TT dollars of royalty payments in the calendar year 2018. That is what we would not have had. And even with that, we still had problems in 2018. Eh? And despite some fairly weak gas prices, in the first half of quarters 1 and quarter 2 2019, we have already earned $1.3 billion. This is money that was actually sourced and commissioned by this People's National Movement administration. And why BP didn't have any tax liability? The very boast that Angeline is their project. You know what BP conceded to get Angeline sanctioned? That they could write off the full exploration cost on any drilling, full exploration cost against their revenue in the year in which it was done. In 1 year, you're amortizing all the capital. Ask Senator West here, you ever hear about that in any taxation regime? What's the price to drill an offshore exploration well? $100 million US. If you drill 3 for the year, that's 300 million US by 6. That's almost $2 billion in tax write-offs in the year. They went further, the UNC administration. Other capital cost was amortized at 20% in a straight line. They went and changed it on behalf of the oil companies to 50 in the first year, 30 in the second year, and 20 in the third year, and accelerated depreciation. That's why the revenue dropped, Not primarily because of lower production and lower prices, which was a big contributor too, but that was the single most important factor. And when, in this year's budget, you will see part of the fiscal measure is to bring it back to a straight line, based on the Minister of Finance presentation. So we dealt with the royalty situation. Then there was another critical matter, revenue leakage, especially out of LNG. That's when the Prime Minister appointed what was called the Empowered Negotiating Team, which was led by myself and Minister Young, and included technocrats and members of the National Gas Company. We held negotiation with BP. We got them to pay historical claims, legacy issues we called it, of $1 billion. They signed up in December 2018, which is the first quarter of this fiscal year. Then we went into some serious negotiations with Shell. Shell legacy payment amounted to $1.9 billion. Monies we would not have had. And because the Prime Minister went to these companies, the Prime Minister took us on what they themselves call a world tour. For 10 days he left this country. He went to The Hague. He went to London. He went to Houston, leading a team to tell the oil companies, we have shareholders too. And the oil companies listened. And I want to give them the recognition today that they understood the government position and they met us halfway. Mr. Vice President, at this point in time, I want to go on the records and let this country know, and that I want to publicly recognize the work of the Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, the Honorable Stuart Young, in this entire exercise. They, on the opposition bench, both here and in the other place, let's call him Minister of Everything. Mr. Vice President, I prefer to have a Minister of everything every day than a Minister of nothing.
And a Prime Minister of nothing too.
They had a lot of ministers of nothing, I'll call one, because I know him well because we fought in Maruka Tableland. The Honorable Clifton Dikoto. He was Minister of Cultural Diversity and Social Integration. Only God and the UNC knows what that means. 80% of his portfolio. Minister, with all folks like the Minister of Finance, 80% of his portfolio was this historical buildings around the Queen's Park Savannah. Nothing was done on it. Today, the Prime Minister leading a small committee of cabinet, finishing all of it, which is a sideshow on the Prime Minister's main portfolio. Minister of nothing. But I say no more, but I really want to go on record to recognize the work and the contribution of these negotiations for Minister Young. I'll come into that now. When we came into office, the gas supply was moving south. In 2017, gas production was 3.3 billion cubic feet per day. Through hard work, through negotiations with the energy companies, we got it up to 3.6 in 2018. It's still a hard fight. In February 2019, it peaked at 3.9 billion cubic feet per day. And as we speak, we are trying to get an average for 2019 of 3.8 billion cubic feet a day. But I make the point on production, but you need not eye production as your eye revenue. Because production may not automatically reflect in a proportional relationship to revenue. So we're getting better on the gas side. I will now deal with the Ryder-Scott report, which is the reserves of the country. In 2016, the Ryder-Scott report indicated. Now, Mr. Vice President, let me just explain something. This country produces 1.3 billion cubic feet, 1.3 trillion cubic feet of gas per annum. Yeah, what you produce. If you don't find 1.3, your life is limited. So every year, just to stay where we are, we have to find a field approximating the size of 1.3 trillion cubic feet. It's called walking up the dung escalator. 2017 was the first time we replaced more than the reserves we produced. So a year-on-year growth was experienced for the first time since 2004. And in 2018, we're just about even. So while we're not out of the woods as yet, we're getting significantly better in terms of the gas profile. Well, how much time I have again? So nice.
You finished at 4:23.
Right. So I will leave gas for a while. Petrotrid. We have articulated clearly the hemorrhaging of Petrotrid. $15 billion accumulated losses over a 5-year period. $13 billion debt. Something had to be done. We took the bold step, through the leadership of the Prime Minister, to restructure and to remodel Petrotrid. Everybody knows Heritage is now a profitable entity on the exploration and production side. They have declared, I think, $534 million in the first 3 quarters of the operation, and we expect better things from them as they ramp up the production. Virtually the entire refinancing package approved without a government guarantee was sanctioned, from the cash flow of heritage. They paying the debt from the cash flow of heritage, because exploration production is lucrative business. The hemorrhage in the whole system was the refinery. And we said, okay, the refinery had two fundamental weaknesses. One, it had a refining capacity of 150,000 barrels of oil per day. And we were only producing 40-something thousand. So you had to import 100,000 barrels. And the refinery economics, based on the cost structure of the refinery and the age of the plants, you were losing $5 US per barrel on every barrel you refined.
Would the minister clarify?
No. What that meant is that you had to do something fundamental. So we decided that the state will get out of the refinery business. We'll put it out on the international market through a transparent process. All that has been explained by the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, and myself. At a meeting in Point Fortin, I recall it, early in the day, I was analyzing the current scenario. And I said something probably out of turn slightly, but I wouldn't deny what I said. I said, it seems as though, based on what I have just outlined, that this refinery will very likely go to a foreign investor. I said it. It's on the record.
And you got blows to say that.
Oh, how much blows I get from them? They said I had a 1% waiting to get it. They said all kinds of things. I stood my ground. I don't see a need to apologize. But as the line minister for energy, probably I should not have made a statement like that. I accept it. Lo and behold, everybody was saying in this country, including the UNC in particular, that we should use our best efforts to give it to a local entity. We didn't give it to a local entity. We didn't give it to Patriotic, you know. Patriotic won the bid. Fair and square. All hell to loose. They're saying it's a political maneuver. They wanted to go to court. Yesterday they withdrew it. The leader of the opposition asking how they're going to raise the money. I said, don't ask me, ask them. 2 months before that, the leader of the opposition wrote Ansel Roger to come back into an alliance with them, you know.
Went to meet him.
And now, because the UNC strategy is to disrupt, not in the positive sense of business, you know, as a disruptive force, but the cat
Standing order
squaddle.
46-4, Mr. Vice President, is insulting. 46-6, impeaching improper motives.
Sandals is you see the same thing. What they are doing there is, I don't want to say much on this deal, is putting sand in the rice on Patriotic's attempt to raise the financing. You know. That's all they are doing.
Standing order 46-6, Mr. Vice President, the Minister of Energy Industries is impeaching improper motives on the leader of the opposition.
Continue.
So that is the state of play. This is a work in progress. I will say no more. As the line minister, I have to be very careful of what I say. But what I have done today, Mr. Vice President, albeit late, is that I have shown how important the revenue side is. And the revenue side, a great deal of responsibility falls on the Ministry of Energy. Because that is where most of our sustainable income, and in particular, our foreign exchange earning comes from. What we do there is very critical. And what we do there, we're dealing with international organizations. What we do there cannot be broadcasted ball by ball commentary to the population. You cannot come here and want a ball-by-ball commentary of everything I do for the day, everything I did last week. You have to trust the system, because these are complex, international, commercial negotiations. And the country has a lot to benefit if it is handled properly. But also the country has a lot to lose if it is mishandled. And Mr. Vice President, in closing, again, I want to say that this whole energy transformation has been pioneered by our distinguished Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Lau, ably assisted by Minister Stuart Young and my good self. I thank you very much.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues in this place. They have done such an excellent job of addressing all the issues to do with the budget. I am tempted to accept the recommendation of one of my independent colleagues and say I thank you and I beg to move. But before I do that, there are a couple of issues that I would like to address. The first one is the allegation that the opposition keeps throwing out that the PNM doesn't have a plan, we put together a mishmash budget, we don't have any ideas. They have this national transformation plan, and they have the answer to take the country forward. I would like to remind the country that last year they had a green and silver and blue plan. I don't know where that went to. This year is a national transformation plan. I don't know what it will be next week. In contrast, what the PNM did under the leadership of the former Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, was called the leading lights in the country together from the private sector, from the public sector, and from academia, and said, work, and this is a committee that committees put together that was bipartisan. It was not a PNM group of people. It was everybody who it was felt could contribute in a significant way to this. The mandate that they got was, how do we move this country forward? What do we want this country to look like? And they sat down over an extended period and came up with a plan that was eventually called Vision 2020. And the PNM, understanding that this 5-year cycle of government does not benefit the country and that we have to have a long-term vision and a long-term plan, set out implementing the vision in that document. We were voted out of power in 2010. The people were misled and they drank the Kool-Aid. And because of that 5 years of mismanagement, we were put back 10 years in terms of our development. So we had to change from Vision 2020 to Vision 2030. But the PNM has a long-term plan. And we are systematically putting that plan in place for the development and forward movement of the country of Trinidad and Tobago. I read in the newspaper where the founder, the leader of a recently formed political party said, well, if Vision 2020 is a plan, why aren't we getting reports on how that is progressing? I would like to say to that person and to all people who are not sure what we are doing, that when we laid the budget in this House on Monday, among the documents that was presented, and it is presented every year, is the Vision 2030 Achievement Report 2018 to 2019. So not only are we implementing that vision, but we are reporting on our progress. And maybe our progress is not as quick as we would like it to be for all kinds of reasons, but we are heading in a direction. Another accusation that is often thrown at the PNM is that we do not consult and we do not listen to the people. Senator Diyal Singh said, I think it was Senator Diyal Singh, that we need a national plan to take the country forward because the 5-year cycle does not work for us. And we agree. When we came into power in 2015, we said to the other side, let us lay this vision, that is a vision of the nation, not of the PNM, before the Parliament, debate it, give us your ideas, we will, have a cut and thrust of debate, and come up with a plan that we can all agree on. So regardless of who comes into power, we know where the nation is going. The UNC, the People's Partnership, refused to do that. So this government is proceeding with its plan, and we hope that the nation will see the light and determine who is guiding the country in the right way. My colleague from Ministry of Public Utilities dealt with the so-called National Transformation Plan, so I will leave that alone. Another key issue that was raised by several people is the budget deficit. Now, yes, we have been operating a budget deficit for the last 4 years, but you know the circumstances in which we met the economy. You know what we have had to face. You know what we've had to deal with. And therefore, the budget deficit did not come about as a result of indiscriminate spending. We actually worked hard at bringing down the excessive spending that was introduced in the prior administration, moving from a high of 63% to an average of between 50 and 53, billion dollars. And so the objective that we are trying to achieve is to arrive at a surplus budget. But we cannot move from income of $58 billion in 2014 to $37 billion in 2016 and balance the budget, unless we fire all the public servants and stop taking care of the needs of the hospitals and stop putting our children through schools. So it is a process that we have been dealing with. We have brought the deficit down from double figures to single figures, and we are heading in the direction where we will get to a surplus budget in the not too distant future. I would remind you as well that the last surplus budget in Trinidad and Tobago was by a PNM government in 2008. And the years before that also were surplus governments. And despite the high earnings from revenue in 2013, 2014, 2015, the budgets were deficit budgets. That was a reckless approach to budgeting. That was reckless spending. We have not followed that pattern. We can explain and justify why in our term we have had to deal with a surplus budget, and we have explained to you how we are dealing with it. In respect of budgeting as well, a couple of senators, Senator Seepersad in particular, said we need to revisit the budget process. And she suggested that we may want to copy our neighbors who have legislation that stipulates what the budget process is. As far as I can ascertain, all of those countries in the region who have done that in response to an IMF program. Because what needs to be put at the top of the agenda when an IMF program is in place is the country's ability to repay its debt. But having said that, I looked at some of the legislation, and my take on it is that a lot of what is legislated in that document or in those documents reflects in effect what we do here. There are things that may be worthy of consideration and worthy of merit, but what I will say to you is that it is difficult to predetermine what issues may arise that may force you to declare a deficit budget. So if you have legislation that says you are only allowed to declare a deficit budget in these circumstances, then what happens if something like the 2014-2015 issue arises and the legislation doesn't prescribe for that? As I was thinking about this issue, another thought that came to mind is that legislation, and 2010 to 2015 taught me this, legislation works for people who are concerned about following the rules. It does not work well when you are dealing with people who are not following the rules. And if you look at a criminal legislation, When you pass legislation to make something a crime, it doesn't mean that people will not commit the crime. It just means there are consequences for committing that crime. So I am positive that the people who drafted the legislation for the establishment of the Green Fund Levy Fund were comfortable that the fund could only be used for environmental projects. I'm positive that they were happy that their drafting was sound enough to protect that fund. But during 2012 to 2015, although the then government accepted that they couldn't take money out of the fund, what they did was they mortgaged the fund away, ineffectively taking the money out of the fund and using it for purposes other than what it was intended. So when you are intent on doing a particular thing or getting involved in particular mischief, you will find a way to do it. And what legislation like that does is that it stymies the ability of people who are prepared to follow the rules to do what needs to be done in circumstances. So yes, calling for legislation to review the process may be something that's worthy of consideration, but we have to bear in mind the fact that we cannot stymie the people who follow the rules, while people who don't follow the rules are left to do what they will. So we're looking at the issue of balancing the budget. And as I said, you know what our circumstances were. Income dropping from $58 billion in 2014 to $37 billion in 2018. So if we are in those circumstances to balance the budget, what do we do? Do we not build new hospitals? Do we not increase the minimum wage? Do we not pay CPAP workers more so that they can afford the rising cost of living? Do we not provide pensions to the retirees? What do we do? So we are saying that is not the answer. We need to continue to bring healthcare closer to the people who need it. We need to ensure that the lowest paid among us can be able to afford to live a decent lifestyle. We need to provide supplies in the schools and medicine in the hospitals. We need to continue to do that. So there are basic costs that we will have to continue to bear. So it is not about cutting expenditure further. It is about ensuring that we increase the revenue that will allow us to meet these basic needs, because we are talking about basic needs. And how are we seeking to do that? And we have had this plan on the table since 2015, and if we had been allowed to move forward quicker, we would be more advanced in terms of balancing the budget. So, the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. What is the opposition's resistance to the Revenue Authority? We have met with the staff of the Revenue Authority. We have met with members of the public. We have met with the chambers. We have met with businessmen. And although in each group you will have some concerns, there is a general acceptance of the concept of a revenue authority. The opposition is not prepared to accept it. Why? If we get what the recent amnesty told me, when we collect, instead of collecting $500 million, as the Minister of Finance predicted when it was introduced, we collected $2.38 billion. What does that say to me? It says to me that there's a lot of uncollected revenue out there, because it certainly doesn't represent all of the people who have not been paying their taxes. That is just a percentage. There's more to be collected. We need to improve the efficiency of collection. The Revenue Authority will do that. Why are we not getting the support? Gaming, the gaming...
Honorable Minister, would you give way? Assuming that the legislation doesn't get passed, the Revenue Authority legislation doesn't get passed, what are some alternative measures that we can adopt to ensure we increase the efficiency of the revenue collection?
I'm happy to deal with that, but I don't want to preempt the debate that will start soon in this place on the very issue, so I will address that in my presentation at the time. Okay, another area in respect of which we should be collecting more money is from the gambling sector. The gambling sector is making millions and millions of dollars every year, billions of dollars every year. We are collecting nothing.
That's right.
Why? All we need is a legislation to regulate them and tax them. What is the resistance to that? The opposition cannot explain that to me either. Property tax was supposed to be the backbone on which local government reform was anchored. The opposition is resisting that. Up to last week, Friday, the leader of the opposition said, we are going to abandon property tax when we get back into government and return land and building taxes. As I've said before, the difference between property tax and land and building tax is that the rate of property tax is lower. And the rate of property tax is lower because we have come to the point where we need to revalue buildings because they haven't been valued since the 1950s. There's not been a broadband revaluation of property since 1950. So if we had left the land and building taxes as is and done a valuation, 6.5% rather than 1% to 5%. Property tax and land and building tax is essentially the same thing. So mamagaing people and telling them we're getting rid of the property tax just because it was the anchor on which you based your last campaign, where does it take us? I had said to Senator Allyson when he raised, I think last year, the suggestion of providing tax relief in respect of flood prevention apparatus. I said to him that it's something that we're happy to consider, but we are doing a VAT gap analysis now, so let us determine how much these measures cost us before we look at, increasing the list of incentives. We have received the draft report on VAT alone, the VAT gap. And based on that report, we are losing $3 billion of revenue because of improper compliance by the Board of Inland Revenue, and we are losing close to $5 billion because of policy decisions in respect of that. So where we zero rate or exempt items, that is a policy decision that produces a loss. So the combined loss between policy and compliance is $8 billion. That alone would get rid of the gap. And remember, this study was done after we had fixed the zero rating list to take off the chocolates and the maraschino cherries and the rum after we had fixed it, the people came in and did the review and said, because of the policy decisions we had made to provide relief under VAT, we were losing close to $5 billion. And this is only VAT. We have corporation tax, we have petroleum tax. All of these taxes provide huge incentives. So the policy gap and the compliance gap in Trinidad and Tobago, although the budget refers to a gap of $5 billion, in my humble view, that is grossly conservative. Yep. The gap is huge and we need to close it. If we are to take Trinidad and Tobago forward and properly support all our citizens and do all the things that we need to do in terms of prisons, in terms of police, in terms of the physically and mentally challenged and all the issues you have raised, which are all excellent issues, we have to collect money from taxpayers. It can't be that some taxpayers bear a burden and some of them don't. So how do we change that? We dealt with the issue of forex overvaluation, so I wouldn't mention that. One issue that Senator Sipasad raised was the stock exchange, that we need to do something to incentivize. And why aren't we doing as well as Jamaica does? But Jamaica and Trinidad are two different countries. Now, there are two factors in Trinidad that are not as advantageous, over which the government has control, that are not as advantageous as they are in Jamaica. And that would be the tax rate, because in Jamaica they have exempted the tax on SMEs for the first 5 years after they list. In Trinidad, we brought it down from the standard rate to 10%. And the other thing is that the process of registration and reporting is a bit more onerous in Trinidad than it is in Jamaica. Those two things we can, if we decide, we can fix. But those are not the only, and in my view, those are not really the important factors that create the difference between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in terms of the success of their secondary market. What is more important and more impactful in my view is that the Jamaican private sector in terms of investment is more active and more aggressive. Trinidad and Tobago citizens, by and large, even when they choose to invest on the stock exchange, want safe investments. SMEs, secondary market companies, tend to be more risky investments, and we don't want to put our funds at risk. In Jamaica, the rate of interest is very high, and therefore, if companies want to get capital to grow and develop, they have to find a cheaper source of funding, and therefore they are forced to go to the capital market. In Trinidad, we don't have that problem. The rate of interest is relatively low. We have high liquidity in Trinidad. We have low liquidity in Jamaica. Easy access to lending funds. We have conservative lending policies in Jamaica. Successful businesses in Trinidad much more easily get loan financing. We have tight liquidity in Trinidad. Tight liquidity in Jamaica, not so much in Trinidad. More importantly, in my view, and I'm talking now as somebody who advised businesses in the past. And one of the things I tried to get some of my clients to do, because I was a tax advisor, was to give more consideration to joining the stock market. And they were interested until they started. So they were not put off by the difficulty, the relative difficulty of registering. They were not put off by the fact that they would still have to pay 10% corporation tax. In fact, they were quite excited by reducing, about the thought of reducing their taxes from 25% as it then was to 10%. What put them off was the fact that they want to maintain control of their companies and they want to maintain the privacy of their information. Until we change that mode of thinking, it is going to be near impossible to stimulate the stock exchange the way we want to stimulate it, the way Jamaica has been stimulating it. So it is more than just what the government can do. We have to change the psyche of Trinidad and Tobago. That is not so easy. VAT refund has been raised by a couple of people, Senator Timor, Senator Sipasad. I will start by saying, do not forget that we met a $4.5 billion VAT refund liability when we came into office. When we came into office, it was $4.5 billion. And it was $4.5 billion in a period where oil prices were over $90 a barrel.
And there was nothing in the current
And
account.
the revenue of the country got up to $57 billion. The revenue of this government in its first full year came down by $20 billion. So we have been trying to pay off the VAT refunds because we know the impact it has on companies. We know that. And we don't want to stymie their progress. But we have had challenges. So the Minister of Finance has come up with an option, a plan to settle some of it with a commitment to move towards making the VAT refunds current. I remember the last Minister of Finance under the People's Partnership promised to make VAT refunds current. And he had the money to do it, but it was not done. This government is trying to get it done. We came up with a solution. It is not ideal. We would like to be able to pay more interest. We would like to be able to pay cash now, but we are doing the best we can in the circumstances. Senator Drayton, I'm sorry he's not here, talked about youngsters not being able to afford housing because the housing sector is unregulated and the prices are unregulated. I would like to ask Senator Drayton if he wants Trinidad and Tobago to go back to a system of regulating prices. We were there. It didn't work. Businesses complained.
Yeah.
So we moved to a free economy, but people are still saying to the government, control the price of houses, control the price of food. We can't do that in a free economy. So if you are an attorney or an engineer and you are saying this to me, if I ask you, well, should I control your fees as well, your response may be different. We can't reprobate and condemn and promote in the same breath. We have a free economy. Demand and supply is what controls prices. Prices in Trinidad and Tobago in respect of houses in particular are amazingly inelastic. When anything happens in the States, when the Fannie Mae and whatever happened, the financial crisis happened some decades ago, or if there's a significant change in property taxes in the States, the prices of houses drop like hot potato. In Trinidad and Tobago, somebody will hold on to property until they get the price. There's nothing the government can do about that. So what we are doing is trying to provide housing for the most vulnerable. And it is a slow process because there is a long list, as we said, but we are doing what we can. But what I can say to Senator Drayton is if the people of Trinidad and Tobago lose the key to their brain and put the UNC back in power and they implement the National Transformation Plan, which includes raising the repo rate, the prices of housing will become even more unaffordable because the rate of interest on mortgages will go up. Senator Hossain made the most amazing, there was very little to note from these contributions today, but he made the most amazing comment about putting competent people to work in the Ministry of National Security. Now tell me. I have two words for him, Rashni Ramnarayan. I say no more on that. I'm sorry that Senator Chote left because there is a response to the main issue that she raised, which is why are we allocating $10 million, but the revised estimate shows $100,000. And that is because the revised estimate is a picture taken at a point in time, which is before the year end. Now, I know this personally because when I was looking at the budget of public administration, there was a figure for ICT cost. And the budget that was approved last year, the allocation, was $67 million. And the revised estimate said $66,000. And I said, but how could this be? I wasn't there, so I didn't know. How could this be? And it was explained to me that this is just the figure that existed in Treasury at the time. We had actually spent the $67 billion. But the Treasury, when they were preparing the document before the end of the financial year, use the figure that they would have had in their records. So there are all kinds of reasons why so late in the year the expenditure would not be close to the allocation. It could be that because of the transparency that we all demand in government, people had to go out to tender, the tender could have failed, they came back 3 months later, the contract was just awarded, the release was requested, the minister didn't have cash on hand, there are all kinds of reasons. But what you need to remember is that we have to come back to this House to vary allocations. So if we are going to move away from what was agreed in the original budget, we have to come back and explain to you why we do that every April or May. And although in a couple of the budgets we have had from 2015 to now, there have been slight reductions between what we had projected to spend and what we actually spent. It was just slight. So it was just like $1 billion off or something like that, spread throughout the public service. And therefore, what it means is that by and large, what we allocate and where we allocate it to, we spend. The real picture will come when we have the final figures that are presented around December or January. So do not be put off by what you see under the revised estimates. They are misleading. And that is one of the reasons why, as part of the budget process, we have the Standing Finance Committee. Unfortunately, it is in the House. That is where they do a line by line of each item. What is this? Why didn't you spend that? What, you know. And so it is explained to the nation. Senator Ahi and Senator Richards in particular, I would like to thank Senator Dylan Remy. I would like to thank you in particular for recognizing some of the good things which we are doing. Because although, contrary to what my friends on the other side say, we are doing a lot and we are achieving a lot. We are doing good work. We do not tell our story. And that is the one failing I would ascribe to this government. We do not tell our story. So thank you for helping to tell our story. Senator Ameen talked about the 106 secondary schools and the 30-something primary schools that they built. If they built these schools, why aren't they done? Wouldn't it have been better to build 10 schools at a time and finish them rather than starting 150 schools and finishing none? Now, the main reason, as you know, why we were not able to finish the schools before now is because you started building schools with no financing. You gave out contracts the week before election for all of these schools. We had to come in and try to find financing to finish these schools. So next time, don't try to fool the population. You're building all over the place. Get projects done. So, Mr. Vice President, what I would say in closing, Mr. Vice President, is that this government has been consistent in trying to steady the economy from what we found. We have done an excellent job in doing that. All credit to the Minister of Finance. This government has identified the projects on which it is proposed to work. Some of them, our progress has been slower than we thought because we didn't expect to find the mess that we found, but we are moving ahead and we are getting things done. This government, and I would like to thank the Minister of Planning for that, because as Senator Khan said, she is the one responsible for the major projects. But Mr. Vice President, how I would like to end is by thanking somebody who is the most unappreciated individual in our country today, and the most vilified citizen in this country today by the other side. Our leader and Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. This is a man of resolve. This is a man of principle. This is a man of integrity. He has promised, when he came in, he promised that The Petrotrain issue was a huge problem. We had to deal with it. We have dealt with it. He came to the country again and said the energy sector is not giving us the return that we need. We have to deal with it. He has dealt with it. Under his leadership, we have achieved those two significant milestones, which are significantly contributing to our progressing our budgeting process forward, because we have removed a huge debt on the one hand, and we have significantly improved our revenue prospect on the other hand. As to paraphrase a very popular expression, a prophet is never appreciated in his own country and in his own time. One of these days, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago will get up and appreciate the mettle of the man who leads us. I thank you, Mr. Vice President, and I thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2020 be read a second time. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended on the 30th day of September 2020.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Mr. Vice President, in accordance with Standing Order 57-2, I beg to move that the bill not be committed to a committee of the whole Senate.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2020 not be committed to a committee of the whole Senate. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill will not be committed to a committee of the whole Senate. Honourable Senators, the question is, therefore, that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2020 be now read a third time and passed. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2020.
A Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question, I now invite Senators to bring greetings on the occasion of Diwali to be commemorated on Sunday, October the 27th, 2019. Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I rise this afternoon to bring greetings on behalf of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago as we celebrate Diwali, the Hindu festivals of light. It gives me great joy to witness the coming together as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to celebrate such an integral part of our culture. I am proud to join in our country's display of rich cultural diversity and the unity which it fosters. Such tolerance continues to manifest the words of our national anthem, which characterizes this land as one, where every creed and race find an equal place. On Sunday, we will join our Hindu brothers and sisters as thousands of diyas will be lit to signify the victory of light over darkness and the triumph of good over evil. Diwali or Deepavali translates to a row or a series of lights and celebrates wealth and prosperity, a theme which continues to stand strong as our nation strives to increase in its overall productivity and stimulate innovation and sustainable development for the benefit of all. During this auspicious time, we recognize the power and noble qualities of the goddess Lakshmi, who is regarded as the embodiment of success. Diwali is much more than lighting a diya. It is the representation of that inner light which dwells in each of us. When ignorance is pushed aside by the understanding and enlightenment, kindness replaces selfishness, where love triumphs over hate, envy, and ill will. Diwali encourages purity, not just the cleaning of our homes, but in the purification of our hearts, our minds, and our soul. Such purity extends to the way in which we interact with our national and natural and physical environment, the strategies we employ to conserve our most vital resources, and the life changes we embark on towards achieving personal health goals. As we prepare to bask in the glow of Diyas, it is a good time to make a resolution to remove all darkness and negativities in our lives. As with any developing nation, Mr. Vice President, we treat with the darkness, the reality of lawlessness, substance abuse, and social inequity. Let us then resolve to do whatever we can to let our positive lights shine to improve the lives of those our paths cross with along our journey. Mr. Vice President, the great Mahatma Gandhi gave us an important message when he said, and I quote, "When I despair, I remember that all through history the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Think of this always. Too often we forget our own power to make a positive difference. Diwali teaches us one of the most valuable lessons, and that is our ability to be a light in our community, our country, or the world. Let us be reminded to maintain hope in the promise of a better, brighter day, and to stay true to the belief that together we aspire, together we achieve. Mr. Vice President, just like the names of Indian delicacies such as kurma, laddu, barfi, pera, or gulab jamun is associated with sweetness. So if you are angry with your loved ones, simply call them any of the names I have mentioned, and life will be so much sweeter. As we celebrate Diwali this year, let us look forward to the promise of a new beginning and renewed enthusiasm to illuminate our way. And may Almighty God continue to endow us all with the richest of blessings. Sitaram, Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, Shubh Diwali 2019. Thank you.
Senator Ameen.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for this opportunity to bring Diwali greetings on behalf of the opposition bench in the Senate. Mr. Vice President, Diwali is a Hindu festival of light. It celebrates the triumph of light over darkness and good over evil. Deepavali literally translates into deep light, meaning light, and Avali, meaning a row of lights. Deepavali is marked by 4 days of celebration, not only one, which literally illuminates the country with its brilliance and dazzles the people with joy. Each of the 4 days of the festival of Deepavali is marked with a different tradition. But what remains constant is the celebration of life, its enjoyment, and a sense of goodness. Historically, Diwali can be tracked back to ancient India. It most likely began as an important harvest festival. However, there are various legends pointing to the origin of Diwali. Some believe it is a celebration of the marriage of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, with Lord Vishnu. Others see it as a celebration of her birthday, as Lakshmi is said to have been born on the new day of Kartik. In Bengal, the festival is dedicated to the worship of Mother Kali, a dark goddess of strength. Lord Ganesha, an elephant-headed god and symbol of auspiciousness and wisdom, is also worshipped in most Hindu homes on this day. In Jainism, Deepavali has the added significance of marking great event of Lord Mahavira attaining the eternal bliss of nirvana. In Trinidad and Tobago, the story of Diwali relates the return of Lord Rama along with Ma Sita and Lakshman from his 14-year exile and vanquishing the demon king Ravan. In the joyous celebration of the return of their king, the people of Ayodhya, the capital of Rama, illuminated that kingdom with earthen diyas or oil lamps and set off firecrackers, hence the traditions we have in Trinidad today. The Ramayana describes Ayodhya almost like a ghost city when Lord Rama was exiled. All its citizens were plunged into an ocean of sorrow and depression for those 14 agonizing long years. When Lord Rama returned, their heart's innermost longing was fulfilled, and there was joyous celebration with the illumination of thousands of diyas. These events and the exile and return is relived in many communities and schools in Trinidad and Tobago by the portrayal of the Ram Leela play and the burning of the effigy of Lord of Ravan. Mr. Vice President, I am not Hindu. I am not Indian. I am a Trinidadian of mixed heritage. In this country, we are privileged to live in a cosmopolitan society that not only tolerates the belief of others, we respect and revere that freedom we each have to choose to practice our religious and cultural traditions. But even further, we also have the opportunity to participate in the cultures of others. The significance for Diwali for everyone in Trinidad and Tobago and even in this chamber may be different. For some, it is religious. For some, it is cultural. For some, we join our Hindu friends and light diyas. And, Mr. Vice President, judging from the long lines at certain food establishments, for some, it is simply an opportunity to eat roti. But just like the people of Ayodhya, Mr. Vice President, who were in grief and depression during the exile of Lord Rama, our nation is at present in a state of despair. But I say to the people of the nation, even though we are facing uncertain times in our nation, this Diwali, the light of the diya, is a symbol of hope. It is our fervent hope on these benches that Diwali 2019 will continue to foster a spirit of inclusiveness and promote cultural and religious tolerance and understanding among all citizens of this great Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. In spite of the darkness enveloping us, unprecedented violence and criminality, exponential increase in unemployment, food insecurity, deteriorating health care, lowering education standards and rising poverty, Trinidad and Tobago continues to stake its hope in a better and brighter tomorrow. The diya continues to communicate to all of us the purpose of our existence, which is to create that flame of brilliance in our hearts and ignite that in the hearts of our fellow human beings. It is through the celebration of festivals like Diwali that we, as citizens of this nation, can increase our consciousness of the way in which light can triumph over darkness and good can triumph over evil. On the auspicious occasion of Diwali 2019, let us hope that Mother Lakshmi showers all her choicest blessings, peace, prosperity, good health, harmony, and a peaceful existence. Hope exists in this nation. On behalf of the United National Congress, to every member in this House, and to all our citizens, I say to you, Sita Ram, which is a greeting used at Diwali time, that basically says, I bow to the divine light within you, which acknowledges the fact that there is a divine light within each and every one of us. Shubh Diwali.
Senator Timal.
Mr. Vice President, it's indeed a privilege to be able to bring Diwali greetings on behalf of the independent senators in this August House. Diwali came to this country mainly through our Indian forefathers when they journeyed to this land starting in 1845. And from the barracks, where they persisted with the celebration of Diwali, into the villages and then communities, we have seen over the years Diwali truly expand and become a national festival in this beloved country of ours. We hear a lot about light for Diwali, and of course, being the festival of lights, and we hear a lot of comparisons about the light and its relation to the human being, and the potential to inspire us on a yearly basis. And being cyclic, the occasion for renewal of our human spirit, our aspirations, and what we would like to see, not only for ourselves, but our families and for our beloved nation. Diwali, as we have heard, is also centered around the worship of the Divine Mother Lakshmi. Lakshmi comes from the Sanskrit root verb laksh, and laksh literally means wealth. And thus, other than the focus totally on light, Diwali offers us the opportunity to reflect on wealth. And in that reflection, we would realize that wealth is just not only necessarily, that material wealth, money, but wealth is very diverse. And wealth is intellectual integrity, wealth is health, wealth is compassion, wealth is all forms of values that nurture us as human beings and bring out the best that we can be. And in how we look at wealth, and in keeping with what we would like to see for ourselves and our country in terms of the sustainable goals that we are setting for ourselves, we should reflect very deeply on these forms of wealth. Because how do we acquire wealth? In itself, in the occasion of a spiritual experience and a spiritual festival based on spirituality, how we acquire wealth, and the means through which we get that wealth. Diwali also reminds us very, very strongly that there is value in how we come about wealth and acquiring wealth. It also reminds us of the responsibility of wealth, because the responsibility of wealth, we would want to think, is for our own self and for the benefit and progress of our individual self. But it also tells us of the responsibility for that wealth for those of us who are fortunate enough to be born into it, or born into good circumstances that allow us to generate that wealth, that we have a responsibility to others. We have a responsibility to those in our community by the giving and the sharing of what we are fortunate to acquire in terms of wealth. And as a country, that we have a responsibility as leaders and legislators and all of us to ensure that the wealth that we acquire is distributed equitably, and that the wealth should benefit all of us in our country. And by extension, should we be so fortunate that it should benefit all throughout the world. So this Diwali, as we all celebrate light, may we also appreciate that the wealth that comes, we put in honest, dedicated efforts, but of course it comes to us through divine grace. And coming to us through divine grace, it places on us that responsibility so that it works for the betterment of our citizens and it works for the betterment of the whole of mankind. Mr. Vice President, to you and your family, and to the hardworking and dedicated staff of this Parliament, to all the senators of this august House, and to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Shubh Diwali.
Honourable members, it is my privilege to extend greetings and best wishes for Diwali 2019. Diwali is the Hindu festival of lights, which is celebrated to mark the triumph of not only good over evil, but also light over darkness. Light, in this context, is a symbol of enlightenment. This year, millions of persons around the world will light diyas, but all the lights of the world cannot be compared to the inner light, one which should infinitely be shining within us. As we observe Diwali, let us not only celebrate, but also concentrate on our inner light as we experience peace, joy, and unity. Let us remember all the values which we strive to imbibe as members of Parliament and as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. These values, which are manifested through prayer and fasting, is a reminder that our good thoughts and deeds are interminable. I join all senators in extending greetings and best wishes to all citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the auspicious occasion of Diwali 2019. May the light illuminate not only our homes, but our hearts. Shubh Diwali to all. Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.